Hello everybody, and thanks ever so much for joining us today for the webinar where we will be exploring how governors can support schools in developing their provision for learners who use English as an additional language. My name is Hannah Stolten. I'm the CEO here at Governors for Schools. I'm delighted to welcome Sheila Hopkins from the Bell Foundation to be joining us today. This academic year, we've been running our inclusive governance campaign with the aim to bring greater diversity to boards and to encourage those who may not otherwise have thought to sign up to volunteer to become a school governor. We want to bring new voices to the board table by encouraging new volunteers to take up the challenge. And in addition to recruiting more volunteers, we're also working with partner organisations to help inform current governors about how they can best encourage and support their own schools to be more inclusive. So, as I said, to that end, we've invited Sheila Hopkins of the Bell Foundation to join us today. The Bell Foundation is a charity that aims to improve policy, practice and systems for children, adults and communities in the UK that speak English as an additional language. So that's that EAL acronym. We know that the education sector is littered with them, but if you weren't aware, EAL, English as an additional language. So they work through an evidence-based approach and want to develop thinking about how such learners can overcome disadvantage through language education. Sheila joined the Bell Foundation in 2020 as a trainer and holds a master's in TESOL, so that's teaching English to speakers of other languages. I had to look that up myself, along with qualifications in primary education and EAL teaching. Her work with the Bell Foundation focuses on multilingual learners and EAL for initial teacher training, early careers teachers and senior leaders. We're hoping that at the end of Sheila's presentations, we'll be able to open up the floor to everybody with any questions. So please do put your questions into the Q&A box as we go along. We're happy to get to those at the end. The webinar will be being recorded at the moment, and will be shared on our website over the coming days. And we'll also be sharing slides which Sheila has presented, which Sheila is going to present via email after the session. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Sheila. Hopefully you can share your slides okay.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Hannah, for the introduction, and thank you on behalf of the Bell Foundation to all of you joining today. I know that EAL is not necessarily a huge priority for Ofsted and thus for many of your schools, but I do want to say that the Bell Foundation has been lately just receiving a lot more requests for guidance and support in this particular area. So we're really happy that you are all here to learn more about this and to support your schools for those multilingual learners who are using EAL. I also know that I do have a resource that goes along with this presentation that will share all the resources, links to the resources that I am going to be sharing with you today. So either it will come up in the chat box, or you will get that in the same email that you get the recording for this session tomorrow. Okay, so please know that that is there. So today we are going to cover 3 different sessions or topics really, and then hopefully have time for questions and answers at the end. We are going to be looking at the context of EAL. Some of you may know this very well, others may be somewhat new to EAL, so I'm going to go through a little bit of the context of that. We will then look at understanding effective teaching of EAL learners. This section is really geared toward as a governor going into a school and being able to kind of get a sense of what you should be able to see in the schools and within the classrooms of your schools, so that you have a better sense of what you're looking for with that. And then at the end, we will do some work on supporting school leaders in developing an EAL provision. Okay, so we will look at all of these, and we'll start with the context right now. Before I dive in, I just want to set the stage by asking all of you just to think. You don't have to put anything in the chat box or anything, but there are just over 9 million pupils in England. That's between nursery and secondary. And just a quick question, how many do you think are classified as English as an additional language? Less than 500,000, about 1 million, over 1.5 million, or over 2 million? And the answer is C. Actually, right now we have 20.2% of learners in our schools in England are multilingual learners who use EAL. So that is up from 2022 when it was 19.5. And we're actually seeing that trend over numerous years, and it continues to be projected to increase. So right now, currently, there are over 1 in 5 pupils in England that use EAL, okay? So if we look at that data a little bit more in depth, we can see that students in nursery, 30.4% of our nursery children are multilingual learners using EAL. 22%, and this is all from the school census in 2023, 22% in primary, 18.1% in secondary, and then we have 14.5% and 8% in special schools and alternative schools. So if we think of those children in nursery as they filter through our education system, we see that the trend is going to continue of increasing our multilingual learners. And it's kind of a feature of a characteristic of our learners that is here to stay at this point. So it's really important for you as governors to have a clear sense, to know who the population is in your schools in terms of how many pupils use EAL in your schools, and we will see further even getting to know more of the context of those learners in your schools. I don't know where all of you, where all of you are coming from, but this chart here at least looks at the total percentages of pupils who we believe to have a first language other than English in the different regions around the country. So you might be able to kind of get a sense of where your region lies. In the resource handout that I have given you, I do link to where you can get your specific information on the Department for Education website that will show the schools, but perhaps more would also be nice if you could actually talk with somebody at your school and get the data from those that are working in the school as well. So again, important to have that knowledge of the schools you work with. Okay. And at the same time, we really want to share with you the definition, the official definition of EAL, which the Department for Education says is a pupil is recorded to have English as an additional language if they are exposed to a language at their home that is known or believed to be other than English. Okay. A couple problems with that definition is that it really does group a real heterogeneous group into one single group. And it's a real super diverse population within that group that they refer to as EAL. The second kind of problem is that it's based on the concept of language exposure rather than language or English language proficiency, okay? So again, you might have some students in your schools might be exposed to, say, Turkish in their home, but are fluent in English, right? And others may be exposed to Turkish in their homes and have very little English language development. So again, something that it's a little bit problematic in that regard. Thinking then about that super diversity of our learners using EAL, this is something that you, again, will want to really get a sense of within your own context, within your own schools, is that our children will arrive with really different situations. Again, you might have people in your schools that have been here for 3 generations and are multilingual, fluent in English and another language. Or you might have students that have just recently arrived. And we've seen a real influx of refugee and asylum seeking children within the last year or so from Afghanistan and Ukraine and Hong Kong and that type of thing. And their arrival situation will be very different, as will their backgrounds and their experiences coming into this, into the UK, along with their educational backgrounds. Some will have very high quality education, others will have interrupted education depending on their situation. So again, something for you to really get a handle on within your own community and within your own school. And, you know, all of them will bring different strengths and challenges and needs, but at the same time, they all come with real rich diversity in terms of culture and language and everything else that they can offer to our schools. So that's another good thing to consider when you're talking about our multilingual learners. So when this was back in 2018, the Bell Foundation commissioned a study from Joe Hutchinson that really looked at some variation factors that played into attainment of our EAL learners. And she found that there were 4 factors that really did impact attainment. And one of them being the level of English proficiency, which would make sense. But some of the others are the age of arrival in the UK school system and the English school system. You can understand that if you arrive earlier, you have that much longer to learn the language compared to those that arrive later. First language was another factor, but that one, I have to kind of say here that one is also really kind of more complex in that it relates to a lot of the language backgrounds, kind of the situation of their arrival, where they're coming from, some of the socioeconomic situations, and so that one's a bit more complex. And then also prior educational and life experiences. So these are the 4 factors. But as a governor, I want to really focus on the level of English proficiency for all of you, because that is one of the things that we can actually have some impact on within the schools. So just so that you know, that this was back in 2016, I think the Department for Education introduced 5 different proficiency bands of English as an additional language. And you see them here from A to E, A being new to English, and then all the way up to fluent in band B, band E. And this will be probably known and used in a lot of your schools, although it's not a requirement to use this. This is something that they've introduced. In another study by Strand and Hessel in 2018, commissioned by the Bell Foundation again, they looked at data from local authorities, and they discovered too that the pupils' attainment increases with greater English proficiency, indicating a strong link between proficiency in English and education achievement. And in fact, really, the English proficiency is one of the strongest indicators of how well our learners will be able to participate and be successful in our schools that are all based on the English language. So a couple bits of data for you, just so that you are aware of this, the impact of the level of English language proficiency is something that kind of is across phases in terms of how well they attain in academic purposes. So here we're looking at early years, and we can see that that 83% of learners whose first language was English, which is the line across the graph, reached a good level of development. And that was only 43% of children who were new to English reached that good level of development. And we can compare this to 85% to 88% of learners who were competent and fluent multilingual learners. So we can see here how the benefits of being bilingual can really impact your attainment and academic attainment as well. But for the new to English, it's really an early acquisition, and actually developing competence is a bit more difficult. So key stage 2, meeting expected standards in reading, writing, and math. You see here that 65% of pupils whose first language was English, that's kind of the median there, but only 12% of those learners who were new to English, 17 early acquisition, reached those expected standards. And again, we see the same trend. 67 to 81% of those competent or fluent were above the expected standards. And again, really quickly, just for key stage 4, you see the same trend in terms of those that are new to English and those that are competent and fluent multilingual learners and English. So what does this mean then, really, for teachers and for schools? It really means that when we are thinking of our support and our EAL provision, is that we really need to offer considerable, significant, ongoing kinds of support for those learners who are new to English, early acquisition, and developing competence. So again, something really important for you to make sure your schools understand the English language proficiency levels of the learners that they are working with. Do we know who is new to English, who is early acquisition, or who is fluent in English? So not just the numbers of our students that are EAL, but also the level of English language development and proficiency that they have, okay? So, but to offer that support, are the teachers in many ways. And we have had some worrying information too that has just recently come out from 2023 on the working lives of teachers and leaders. And it was found from early career teachers in that report. They stated that they felt, early career teachers felt least prepared to teach in a multilingual classroom compared to all other training areas, okay? And teachers in general, all teachers just feel that EAL is one of their top 3 CPD needs. So again, something to consider as you are looking into the schools, what is there CPD available for these teachers in your schools that is specific to EAL? To compound this as well, the initial teacher training core content framework, which is for initial teacher development, all that is based on the initial teacher core content framework, and the early career framework, which all that CPD and training is based on this for early career teachers. Neither of those frameworks mention EAL. So we can see because of that where the needs really lie. And I think this is why, with the increasing numbers, that teachers are really coming to us more for support in this area, okay? So with that, let's kind of move on now to thinking about effective teaching and practices that you probably would hope to see if you go out into your schools and just visit your schools. Sometimes it's a good thing to possibly just think about, if you were a learner, put a hat on your head as a learner who really does not have much English proficiency, and if you were to go into your school, would that be a place that you feel as if you would thrive? It's a good way to kind of think about those school visits. And the Bell Foundation has actually, we have 5 principles of what effective EAL pedagogy looks like. And so this might help to kind of give you a sense of what you should be looking for too within your schools, okay? So let's take a dive into those. The 5 principles, I'm going to mention them here and then we'll go into them a bit more in depth. But the first one is that multilingualism is an asset, okay? 2, high expectations with appropriate support. 3 is integrated focus on content and language development. 4, effective and holistic pupil assessment. And 5 is social inclusion. Okay. Before I go into each one on their own, I want to bring your attention again to a resource that will be in that document, whether you get it today or tomorrow. We have just recently put out a resource called the Classroom Guidance and Support Strategies for EAL learners. Now, these guidance pieces are just full of ideas and strategies that teachers can use in the classroom. And they are based on or organized around those 5 principles that I just introduced. So it's kind of a nice combination. So it's not just theory, but you also have the actual practice. So I would always suggest that you don't just go in and talk about, what was good pedagogy without also following up with how do you do that? So this document can really be helpful with that. And it is also organized around the English language proficiency levels, because we know that the support that you would provide to someone who is new to English will look quite different than the support you would provide to someone who is developing competence. Okay, so it's organized around all of those things. So yeah, something that you would want to use both of these resources together. Okay, so let's look at multilingualism as an asset. Encouraging learners to use and develop their full linguistic repertoire is highly beneficial. This is something that you would, when you go into a classroom, you would want to see and hear the languages that are spoken by the learners in the school, not just for social purposes on the side, but within the classroom for academic purposes. Particularly, I mean, sometimes the best resource a learner has who is new to English for both learning new concepts and for learning English as well is their home language. So that is something that we really encourage teachers to make use of, so that they don't have to like shut down all of their language at the school door, but that there's a way that they can use that and to be given opportunities to use that in the classroom. And again, strategies for that are in that document that I've provided to you. So that is something that you would want to see and hear if it's on signs or within the classroom or within the worksheets and things that kids are doing. Is that something that we see? Second one is high expectation with appropriate support. Having high expectations is something that we should be providing for all of our learners, whatever their language background or learning abilities are, all of that. We should always have the motivating and inspiring kinds of lessons for everyone. The thing with learners who are learning English is that they're not just learning that content, but they at the same time are learning English. So really, teachers need then, it's like double the work in some ways, and teachers really need to provide language support as they to be able to access that curriculum. Okay, so again, ideas for how to do that are in that guidance as well. Number 3 is focusing on both content and language. Again, teachers out there are just not only content teachers, they are also language teachers of that content. So again, if you're out in the school observing and looking for this, are teachers focused on language and content together? It's not something where students are going to learn English in some other place or just in the English classroom and then come into the content. It's not that the content is not going to wait. The curriculum won't wait. We can't have these learners spend years learning English without that content. So they need to learn English through their curriculum. Sometimes it's okay to do you know, like having some sessions, withdrawal sessions at the very beginning, but that should always be for very short term and focused on content and for specific reasons. So really to see all kids should be included in mainstream classrooms with adapted teaching. Okay, effective and holistic pupil assessment. Again, does your school really have a way of collecting that information I talked about before? What is their language and literacy practices? What was their skills within the education backgrounds? What is their English language proficiency? Kind of a holistic approach to this as a way of understanding what support they may need and what challenges they may need as well. And so in the targets as well that you would want to try to support the language development. Okay, so that's another piece to it. And then social inclusion. From day one, learners with EAL should be included in all aspects of the school, extracurricular activities, as well as mainstream classrooms and all of that. Again, this is something that I should have said this in the slide before, but learners that use EAL do not have any learning barriers. I mean, as we saw in the graphs, their learning is that, you know, actually bilingualism is a real asset to academic attainment. So it's just a language barrier that they have. So whatever they can do socially to be involved in mixed language groups and learning that language and being exposed to English in all aspects of school life is really important, as well as with families and communities. So again, how is the school, is that something that you're seeing in the schools as you go visit? Okay, so knowing that with all of that that we have just kind of covered there, it's important to think, okay, well then how can you really support school leaders to develop an EAL provision? And that is something that we will move on to here. I think really in terms of thinking about EAL provision, there are 6 different areas that you can look at. We've got leadership and management is one area that you will want to be concerned with, or speaking with head teachers and leaders in your schools. Resourcing and funding around EAL, continuing professional development, as we saw previously, the needs for that to take place in your schools. Pupil induction, assessment, placement, and monitoring of progress. We would just kind of see how that is. Are there policies for that in your schools? Teaching, learning, and the curriculum, and also the school environment, attitudes, and ethos. So these are really 6 areas that we find are really important to consider when thinking about EAL provision when you do this with those leaders in your schools. Now, to help with this, again, in your resource, you will have a link to this. All of the resources I am talking about today, by the way, are freely available on our website, the Bell Foundation website. I forgot to mention that. So yeah, the Bell Foundation is very generous in terms of the amount of resources and guidance that they provide. So another useful tool for you here is an EAL self-assessment for schools, again, at the primary and secondary level. And this is just kind of like a needs analysis or a needs assessment that you can use with schools. And it's organized around those 6 different areas. And it's just useful to be able to use it as you're having discussions maybe with your school leaders, or just for yourself, really, if you want to get a sense of what kinds of questions you should be asking or thinking about as you approach helping and supporting your schools with EAL provision. Okay, so we'll go in and look. Well, again, I want to quickly mention the list of resources. This is what the handout will look like, and it is based around these 6 areas of EAL provision. So I have the links to all of these are organized around these different pieces of provision. Okay, so when you go into that self-assessment tool, however you are wanting to use it, whether you really do want to do a needs assessment with your school or have conversations with the heads or just for yourself, this is what it will look like. There will be a number of questions that will be worth considering when you're thinking about leadership and management. This is specific for that topic. And then there will be space for the response, as well as providing evidence of where this is being seen. And then a score between 1 and 5, from highly evidenced that, you know, it's working really well, to those to 1 where maybe there's no evidence of it taking place. And then again, some action plans, is space for you to think about what can be done in that area. So nice tool to use for you. As you can see, the first, I'll come a couple questions here. The first one is there a named governor who leads on EAL? And how does the governing body support and challenge the school with regards to its EAL provision? So, and again, going further down, is there a member of the SLT who has the responsibility and accountability for EAL provision? Does the school have an EAL strategy in place? Do you know what it is? Do you know who you would talk to about creating an EAL strategy and that type of thing? And does the school have an EAL policy or a language policy in place as well? So these are the types of questions that are being asked. And I will say that I do teach a course with the Bell Foundation for senior leaders called the Leading a Whole School Strategy for an EAL strategy. And at the very end of that course, we have senior leaders think about a little bit of an action plan themselves and some of their top priorities that they would like to actually see in their schools. And inevitably, I will let you know that this fourth one about creating an EAL policy, some kind of strategy within their school, is always a top priority for so many of them, because a lot of schools do not have this in place. And it's really hard then to move forward with some kind of strategic way of moving forward and knowing what needs to happen and who's involved and all of those pieces with the policy. So that is something that I know is something that really leaders have a real strong need for, and would be good for you to also be involved in them as well. To help with that in terms of resources, then the Bell Foundation does have, again, guidance on how to write an EAL policy. And I think actually inclusive governance is actually included a document, maybe this one or something like it, in their own course e-learning offering on becoming an effective governor. But this is a good document to look at in terms of how to create a policy, and also a language policy, because we talk about the importance of allowing learners to use all of their language resources. But if some teachers are doing that in their classrooms and other teachers are not, it's really confusing for learners. So it's important to look holistically at the whole school strategy for this type of thing. So that's an important document. And in terms of trying to figure out, well, what do we put in this document? There's a lot of guidance for school leaders. Again, these are all documents available on the website, as well as for classroom teachers, because again, the needs and the interests of those two things will differ. But all of that, again, is something available that you can have access to as well. Okay. Moving on to resourcing and funding. Again, some other questions. How effectively does the school access the local and national funding and specialist support that is available? Is there appropriate number of designated EAL staff in school or that kind of support? Are these teachers being designated, say, as the EAL coordinator, but not giving any remit? Are they just supposed to do that on top of everything else? So again, these are important questions for you to consider and for you to take into your schools to ask about. Okay. For resources for this, I mean, there is something on the Bell Foundation website, the provision and funding information there. But I'd also have you look at the national funding formula for school and high needs. And in that document, the Department for Education does fund or provide 3 years of funding for any new arrival who is designated as EAL. So they have another language or exposed to another language at home. So that funding needs to be specifically spent on EAL. It can't just go into a general pot. And so it's good for you to know about that. I think it's about $590 per year for primary and $1,585 for secondary. Now, typically on the side here, I had to be worried about time, but on the side, it usually takes for someone who is new to English at least like 6-7 years to really become fluent in the language. So that's good funding, but perhaps not completely enough for when you think of the entire range, but something that you should be aware of and be aware of how it's being spent and effectively. Is it, are you getting, is it effective spending? And again, it's hard to tell that unless you really have an EAL policy. So a lot of these things kind of go hand in hand, like what are the priorities for the school? Where are the needs and that type of thing is something that you should be looking at, not just let's do it on this, right? It's something that needs to be strategically planned for. Okay, continued professional development. Again, this is something where what training and guidance have the SLT had on leadership. So it's not just the teachers for this, it's what has happened for SLT, what is happening for teachers, what is happening for the people in the office who work so closely with parents, what is happening for TAs, who oftentimes are the ones that have the most experience with one-on-one working with our EAL learners. So this is another real important strategy that you will want to make sure gets addressed. And again, some of the funding may need to go into this first if this is an area that you do not have, your schools do not have the type of CPD that they're needing. I want to draw your attention to one of the last questions here. Some of these have actually more than just one page for questions, but how does the school ensure that inclusion manager or SENCO is knowledgeable about English language development for children with EAL but do not have SEND? And I think what happens often is that they could be conflated, EAL and SEND, and they are really very different, distinct areas. So something for you to be very aware of, and something that schools have really come to us a lot lately. That's one of the highest requests. How do we work with diagnosing those kids that have EAL and SEND and that type of thing, and then offering the provision for that, and to not conflate the two, because they are completely different and strategies will be different. So just to be aware of that. In terms of some CPD resources then, the Bell Foundation, again, if your school that you work with is a teaching hub, you might be interested in this, or just if there's other schools that are working with initial teacher trainers and training. We have a series of 3 modules that are either 60 or 3 hours in length. They can choose. We've made each module different time frames there. And those modules have to do with the context of EAL, language learning in a classroom, and then assessment. So those are available to any trainer that is working with initial teacher trainers. And it's kind of like curriculum for them, along with PowerPoints and readings and assignments and that type of thing. So a nice resource if you have any connections yourself or within your own schools that have to do with initial teacher training. Early career teachers, as we just saw, this is one of their highest needs. This recently came out from the Bell Foundation too, just last September, I think. And we have a series that is a self-study. And again, it's online, available to anyone and free again. But it's a self-study with 9 modules, very short modules, because we're very aware of the time limits of teachers, especially early career teachers too. But each of those modules has 2 topics that are really high impact EAL topics, important information to know or strategies, that type of thing. And it's all aligned with that early career framework, kind of taking an EAL lens into the early career framework. And it's something that can be actually used in alignment with the other early career mentorship program that takes place the first 2 years of any teacher's career. Or it could be something that teachers can just dip into when needed, along with their mentors. And that is something like if a teacher is getting a new arrival, you might want to just go straight to module 7 on new arrivals and get the information there. So again, a really nice resource. Our feedback is that it's great for ECT, but it also is really good information for all teachers, really. But we wanted to target early career teachers with this as well. And then we have our own online and blended professional development courses. There are 3 weeks. These do cost, I think 40 for state schools and 60 for independent schools per person, but they are 3 weeks in length, and they have trainers as ourselves with a lot of webinar and information, and also implementation kind of assignment at the end. And then of course we do have lots of webinars that we provide throughout the year on all sorts of topics, and we have those as pre-recorded as well. So lots of information for you to pass on. Okay. Oh, and I forgot, I don't want to forget this one. We just recently, I think just in February actually, we have launched the EAL and SEND, a framework for integrated provision in schools. We worked with some real expert teachers in the field on this particular guidance piece, and had hundreds of people educators come to our webinar on this. So it's a really good resource. again, for you to bring to a school, to your setting, and see if your school is kind of how it compares to this framework in terms of provision. Okay, so another resource for you to look at. Moving on to pupils, induction and assessment and placement. Again, is the admission process for new EAL pupils timely? Do we know what we're doing? Is there a policy or procedure for bringing new arrivals in? How are we gathering information for that? All of those important initial pieces. How are we welcoming families and the learners in a way that provides us with the information we really need in terms of working and providing a thriving environment for those learners. Is there something in your schools that helps teachers to assess for a learner's English language proficiency? Is that something the EAL coordinator does? Do teachers do that? What is happening with that? Or do we not know what the English language proficiency is of the different students in our schools? Because without knowing that, it's really hard to know what appropriate support and targets to really set for those learners. And are we monitoring progress? Is it something that our English language learners, are they progressing as well as other students here, or is that something that's not happening, or is the English language development not progressing well? All of those types of questions are important to ask in terms of EAL provision. Okay, so this is something that, again, you will want to ask your school some of these questions and see what is going on with family connections and induction of pupils into the school as well. The foundation offers guidance, of course, on new arrivals. This is a particular process or program for different types of levels with it. We call it PAUSE, but it stands for preparation of what the school needs to do to prepare for this, alerting all those who might be involved with the pastoral staff and teachers and all of those, as well as the welcoming and the sustained support as they move forward. So again, a nice guidance in terms of how to think about an induction program within your schools. So another piece for you to look at. I think the thing that the Bell Foundation is probably most well known for is its EAL assessment framework, or at least that's something that has been around for quite a bit of time. And this is the assessment framework to assess English language proficiency. So again, it's something that we have freely available on the website, and it can be administered really from the EAL coordinator or teachers in the classroom. It's really based on the work that the children are doing, instead of like some separate assessment that takes place outside of the school. And so it really kind of assesses for all speaking, reading, listening, and writing, all of the 4 different modes. Again, webinars on how to do this, courses on how to do this, or just some videos that are linked right to the page with the tool to use for assessment, as well as how it connects to the classroom strategies, and also a tracker so you can monitor English language proficiency. And other guidance out there, how to create a pupil profile, which will help with the new arrivals, guidance on how to do these things, not just to talk about them, but how to do them, how to welcome learners who might be coming from more refugee and asylum seeking status. Those needs will be different for those learners as well. And so if your school is one that has recently had an influx of learners coming from different countries who are seeking refugee and asylum, again, something that you can look at there in terms of how to welcome all children in those regards as well. Okay. Teaching, learning, and the curriculum. This now is going to be more for classroom teachers. The questions here will focus on classroom teachers. So we really recommend, if you are to do a needs assessment with your school, or to talk to leaders or people about this, we recommend that you try to get as many stakeholders involved as possible, because your input, the input that they can provide and the feedback they can provide from a variety of stakeholders will really be helpful. So yeah, even from teachers to parents to students to leaders to get that type of information is going to be really useful for you personally to learn about this in the context of your school, but also to get a sense of what's going on and where the support is needed. Okay, so you can help leaders with getting a sense of that as well. So again, I've talked about the guidance a couple times already here, but other things that you'll find on your resource handout is some EAL strategies for the great ideas. These great ideas are just similar to ones that are offered in the guidance, but they go more into depth. If you need to know how to use it, there's a little video in there and a one-page example of what that looks like and how to do it. The other thing that might be useful for you as a governor, but also for teachers, is that we have what we call teaching resources, that teachers can just grab these resources to use in the classroom. But how you might want to look at them too is that they are always based on curriculum, because we need to integrate curriculum and language learning. So they're organized by curriculum topic and year level, but also by English language proficiency. So it's kind of looking at that and what kinds of strategies teachers can use for learners at different proficiency levels within a particular topic that they are doing within the classroom. So it's a nice, if what I'm talking about here makes no sense, or if you're like, I need to see this, that would be another good resource for you to be able to do or to share with teachers, or yeah, so that it's not just something that we talk about, but we actually can see how that looks. Okay. And then finally, school environment, attitudes, and ethos. Again, this is something for multilingual learners and families. Questions like, how does the school recognize and celebrate multilingualism? Does the school actively reinforce the assets of bilingualism? Is it viewed as an asset or a problem? And do EAL pupils and families play a full part in the school life? So again, this is something that has some good questions here, but when you walk into that school, do you see and hear students and families in all different languages being recognized, celebrated, promoted, encouraged as well? And again, in a way that is probably really a good resource for learning new content and learning English as well. So so anyway, and being able to communicate with parents. That's a whole other webinar, how to communicate with communities and families and parents. Well, I think what I would say in a nutshell really is, are we all learning from one another? Are you aware of the communities in your school? Are you learning from them? Are we communicating with families in a way that we learn as much from them as they are learning from us? So it's not assimilating into the school, but it's really all learning together and creating making decisions and creating new spaces together. That's something that we can all contribute to. So that's something to look at, and I'll give you one resource that will be helpful with that. But again, from the Bell Foundation, how to provide multilingual support in the classroom as a guidance, as well as guidance for parents in terms of how the education system works in England. We have bulletins on this, and they're, I think, translated into 17 different languages as well. So that might be another nice thing you can provide to schools, to your school, if you have, if that could be a need within your schools. But then also the last one here is how schools are integrating migrant pupils and their families into schools. And this one is not a Bell Foundation resource, but it's something that has come out, I think it was back in 2019, but really thorough, done by Manzani and Rolfe, did a study of all these schools in England that were doing different things to integrate multilingual families, migrant families into their schools. And it just gives a really nice overview of some of those strategies that are really working well in schools. And of course, every context is so different, but I think it's a nice piece of work to kind of look at that, to get ideas of how that could possibly be done in the school, that you are at, if it makes sense for your particular school. So I did want to include that one in there for families, working with families and communicating with families as well. We were asked to talk briefly too about the translation services and that type of thing. I think the best way for all of you, to provide support and guidance with this would be to check with the local authorities, for schools to check with their local authorities what is in place for translation services, because some local authorities will have really well-developed and good translation services that they are working with. And others might not have as much, but might be able to refer you to something that they know of or that they work with. So it's really depends around the country in terms of what to do in that regard. But that is what I would really recommend, is to go to the local authority and see what is going on with that, because some have some really great resources and ways of doing that. So check with that first. Okay. So I have given you a lot of information. I feel like I've just raced through all of that, but hopefully it's been just a kind of a good overview of EAL, some of the needs that your schools may have, and ways that you could possibly support and provide assistance, and things that you should be considering as a governor, of what to be looking for, what to be asking, and then the resources that can actually help you provide the answers to some of those things. So before I go to questions and answers, I just like to stop and have you reflect, because I think otherwise we just walk out and move on to what's next on our plates. But I would like to give you a minute to just think of 1 to 2 things that you really learned from this last 40 minutes or so. So I'm going to give you a minute to just think of that 1 to 2 things that stood out for you. Okay, and then again, 1 to 2 things that you would like to take some action. Could be really small, but what are you going to do with this new sense of learning and all the information that has come forth today? Okay, well, very good. I would honestly like to wish you well in all of those thoughts that you just had there. I will admit one thing. I forgot to actually include on the resource page, the Bell Foundation website address, but you can Google that, I'm sure. It's Bell Foundation at
We'll
Google
put it
it.
in the chat, don't worry.
I never have to Google it. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But you
We will
can
put that
Google
in the
that.
chat.
And again, I just want to thank you all very much. And if there's time for questions and answers, I would be happy to take them at this time, Hannah.
We do have 6 minutes, and we have got lots and lots of questions. So really has fired up everybody with lots of questions. I'll try and whip through as many as possible.
Okay.
And a couple of sort of ones which probably you can answer quite quickly. First, a question from Rosie. At what point in a pupil's school life are they no longer classified as EAL, or are they always EAL if they come in?
Yeah, really good question, because in this here, with that definition, that official definition, it has nothing to do, the EAL, categorization has nothing to do with English proficiency. So once you're EAL, you always are EAL. But that's why it's really important for us to the problem with that, because we need to know what is the English language proficiency levels of our learners, so we know who to support and how. So yes, the answer is always, but that doesn't mean that you don't know that kids aren't fluent in English, right? So that's why it's really important to understand the proficiency level of your learners, and for your schools to know how are we assessing for that.
Mm-hmm. Do we have data if the percentage of EAL pupils going on to further education, college, university, etc., increased is in a similar sort of trajectory as the as the graph that you showed at the beginning?
As first language English? Sorry, I don't know the data on that. Are we asking if we're seeing learners going into further education?
More children coming through with EAL, are there an equivalent a greater number of pupils going into further education?
Yeah, I don't know the exact answer, but maybe if I can get that and put it into for you tomorrow, that you can send out in your email. I'll look for that today, and I don't know the data off the top of my head for that one, but I will look.
That's great. You mentioned about the funding for 3 years that's available for new arrivals. Somebody's asked whether the funding schools receive is matching that increase in EAL pupils coming through. Is that funding pot available for any number of pupils? Is there a limit on it? Do you know?
No, it's available for any, that funding is available for any new arrival who has been here for 3 years. I mean, up to 3 years.
3 years.
Okay. So it's something, it follows their UPN number, and so it goes along with that, and it lasts for 3 years.
Lovely, thank you.
That makes sense.
Absolutely. We've had a couple of questions around schools with maybe a broad range of EAL language versus cohorts with just a few different languages in schools. Are there different considerations that we need to be aware of as governors when talking to schools on that basis?
Yeah, I mean, because the challenges are different there, really. I think when you have a large number, I think the opportunities for support can be a whole lot easier, and there's a lot more to draw on when you have a large number like that, because we oftentimes, part of assisting a learner who is newer to English is to partner them with someone who shares a common home language, that type of thing. So that would be a lot easier to draw upon, partnerships and all of that within a classroom than if you just have one that is, a student that is somewhat on their own with all of this. So I think what you really will need to look at is, is there the experience of the staff. If you have a large population, you might be in a school that has been aware of this and have provided a lot of continued professional development and experience of teachers within the schools. When you have some schools that have very little learners with the EAL, then that is something too that schools might not have the staff that have that kind of expertise or experience working with them. So CPD might need to be something that you would consider when you have lower numbers. So again, it really depends on the context of the school, but just some of those things to think about. And it might be completely new with you don't have as large a population to all of that. Is there a language policy? Is there an EAL policy? It might be something from scratch. So you'll have to really prioritize your thinking around all of this because you can't just do everything at once. So the needs might be really different in both contexts as well.
Lovely, thank you. A few comments about the suggestion of using home languages in the classroom. Other than signposts or vocabulary around the classroom, what does that look like? How do you put teachers in a position where they can interact in those languages? Maybe they're not proficient in themselves or have. Absolutely.
Right. And which is probably all, it's a very common situation where teachers are not going to know all the languages that their learners might bring to the classroom. So when I say that, we're really talking about things like, do they have access to bilingual dictionaries or translation apps, that type of thing? Are we using those as well? Are there bilingual materials that are in the classroom? Do they see their language? Are they being partnered with somebody who might share their home language, and to be able to be given the opportunity to work in whatever language they prefer? That might mean that they might want to take notes in their home language or fill in a graphic organizer first in their home language or in both languages as they are moving fluidly between both. They might want to write a piece of writing first in their home language before translating it into English. These kinds of things, they have the language, that they can actually use to get to these concepts, but it's something that if they're being able to use it, then it's much more difficult for them to be able to take notes or do a draft or talk something through with somebody in their home language to understand the concept better. So lots of ways we can do that without a teacher ever knowing the language that the learner is using. Or if there's TAs that speak, a similar language, allow that language to be used.
Okay, well, lots and lots of thanks in the Q&A for a great session. If we've got time, I know it's 1 minute past, but just one question around engaging with parents. I think that is there a top tip about how to engage with parents with a multilingual background, or get them to stand as governors? That would be ideal. Any sort of top tips on how to really bring them into the education?
Absolutely. To be able to, I think honestly, to have our understanding of not just giving information to parents, but to see them as leaders, as people that can help make the decisions and getting into those leadership roles as governors and that type of thing as well. I would say look at your community already. There are probably parents that are pretty active and that could be really good liaisons. I would talk to the parents. I would talk to students. I would really have an individual conversation, I think, within your community about how best to do that, because it's hard for me to give like one answer to that. But the more you can involve and bring in parents and families and work with them, and maybe there's it's not just one family, there's a whole community out there that knows that language as well, hopefully, probably. So to try to get that community involved as well would be really helpful in terms of starting that. And that starts from the very beginning, the day they walk in, welcoming them as the new family into the school. So yeah.
Thank you, Sheila.
Talk to them. Yeah.
We could go on for another 30 minutes easily, couldn't we? Thank you so much.
Yeah. You're so welcome. It was really helpful to be there.
Yeah, I've got my notes to take away as well, so I'll be going back to my school and asking those questions. Thank you. Really appreciate you joining us.
Absolutely.
Thanks everybody else for joining us. We will be sharing the slides and all of the wonderful resources that Sheila mentioned, links to those so that you can access them and share them with your schools. But thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.